Welcome to Bat Therapy, exploring your favorite comic book characters through the lens of clinical psychology. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness. We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. The time has finally come.
Okay, so for all of our listeners out there, I don't know if you have noticed this, but there's someone that I feel like I mention almost every issue. A villain by the name of Killer Croc.
Yes.
And I feel like with me mentioning him every single time, we should maybe talk about him.
Yes, Keaton's love for Killer Croc runs wide, it runs deep.
So, like when I first hear his name, like you think of all of the animals with the name Killer in it, right? Killer bees, Killer whale. I feel like there's another one I'm forgetting. I don't know. There's dozens of bad sci-fi movies with the name Killer in front of a random animal, right? Like it's Sharknado. I don't know.
Oh
I feel
my
like
God.
that's Killer.
I swear, I was literally in my head thinking Sharknado. I swear.
It's the go-to. It's the best. It really is the best. But yeah, Killer Croc is like, so let me ask you, Amelia, when you hear the name Killer Croc, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
And I thought I was the psychologist here.
I just riddle me this.
Yeah, leading with Killer and Croc. I mean, I guess Croc is a more neutral thing, but still, it has a certain connotation, especially if you're not actually a crocodile. But yeah, Killer
Right.
is quite the first name.
Now, the biologist in me was bothered because when we talk about his backstory, he was born in Florida. So even if he was a reptilian, he would be an alligator and not a crocodile. So
But
right
angry
off the bat,
alligator doesn't really have the same spin.
it's alliterative though.
Yeah.
It's the angry alligator.
Yeah.
It sounds more like a children's book. It definitely does.
But,
The hungry caterpillar and the angry alligator. Right.
Though, if he had been the angry alligator, okay, still connotations that aren't necessarily the most positive, but
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe things would have turned out a little different.
Maybe. Because a Killer Croc is a rough name. He didn't always have that name. Killer Croc was actually born Waylon Jones. He was from Florida and he just had a bad skin condition. And of course, just like most villains, he was severely bullied and picked on. His mom died during childbirth, and of course his dad abandoned him. And so Waylon was raised by his aunt. She took him in. However, she happened to be a severe alcoholic. And so he was constantly ridiculed. He had no friends. And of course, he was in an abusive home because of the aunt. And so with his condition, he eventually started working with a circus or a carnival. He was part of a sideshow carnival where he wrestled alligators.
Okay, but once again then, where did Croc come from?
Very good question.
Do you have an answer?
So he wrestled alligators so well that they gave him the nickname Killer Croc. And so he wasn't really making a lot of money as a alligator wrestler with the carnivals. So that's when he turned to crime. And so he started working under different underbosses and kind of just started moving up the ranks until he caught the attention of Batman. And so one thing that is interesting about Killer Croc is he's kind of a joke character,
Mm.
and because he's kind of a joke character, and I say that just because whenever you see him, it's like, oh wow, Killer Croc. I always forget that's a thing, right? It's
Unless you're Keaton, and then it's all
unless
you think about.
right, it's all I think about every time I watch a Batman movie or read a Batman comic and they show Gotham Harbor and I see the water, I'm like, wonder if Killer Croc's in there, right?
Every time you go to fill the bathtub for your son, or you go to the beach, or you walk by a water fountain, you see Killer Croc there.
Yep, there you go. Every single time, every single time. Now, here's one thing that I will say. He's a very menacing looking
Yeah, yeah, that's totally true.
individual because so comic book wise, at least according to the Batman Arkham games, he's 9 feet tall. He's
Damn.
9 feet tall and 310 pounds. So he's massive,
He's a
right?
big dude.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
In another universe, Killer Croc is the starting center for the Gotham Knights basketball team, right?
Wait,
He
I'm sorry. So they won't let women with higher levels of testosterone be in like sports, like track and field and whatnot, but they let a 9 foot tall.
I this isn't an actual universe that exists. I'm saying in another
No,
world.
this really exists somewhere.
Okay, you're right. I mean, yeah, this is the multiverse we're
I'll
talking
I'll
about.
give you that. In this multiverse, maybe maybe there aren't
Right,
those other issues either.
right, right. And
Okay,
I'd
so that's
like to think,
interesting. So it in different storylines it looks different, but in general he's trying to find his place in the world, and it maybe sometimes turns
right.
out better than sometimes than others. So when he's on the Gotham Knights, is he also called Killer Croc? Is that like his nickname?
Oh, in my mind, in this universe that I made up, um, I think it becomes a good thing, maybe
Yeah.
like the Killer Croc, but I don't know, the Green Machine, like something.
Yes.
Yeah, the the
Oh, that's
the the,
better.
the Mean Machine. Well, there's always, yeah, because, well, all right, so in, I think it's the Adam Sandler movie, The Longest Yard, the name of the football team is the Mean Machine.
Mm.
But then also there's a Disney movie all about soccer called The Big Green,
Mm.
which I also think is a perfect nickname. And then
That's
of
right, folks.
course,
Our nerdiness goes beyond Batman.
yeah, and of course I think the big green wall in the Boston Red Sox stadium is the Green Monster, right?
Yeah.
So I think that,
So going with green. I
yeah,
like it.
I
The
think so. I
green
mean, he
machine.
is
Yeah.
he is green. So one thing that I'll say DC did with this guy is they definitely went all in on, oh, his name's Killer Croc. Let's make him look like a crocodile and not explain why. Because it
Yeah.
began with, oh, he has a skin condition. And it ended with, he has razor sharp teeth. He's green and looks just like an anthropomorphic alligator.
Does he
Like
even have a
it,
tail, or am I imagining? Am I adding that in my imagination?
Great question. So, in some universes, he does have a tail.
Okay.
In the Arkham universe, he ends up getting genetically experimented on to the
Hmm.
point that he keeps resembling a he becomes more and more reptilian looking
Yeah.
throughout.
Okay.
In
Okay.
Yeah, now in the Batman animated series universe, they did something a little bit different. In Batman the animated series, his name isn't Waylon Jones, his name is Morgan. They call him Killer Croc Morgan, and he still started with, like, he still started wrestling alligators and all that, but
As you
he
do.
is just this kind of an idiotic villain that just, he's always like, I'm gonna throw a rock at Batman. Like, he's almost every time he's on screen, he talks about how he's gonna throw a rock at Batman and just hit him. And Batman even makes fun of it, because there's an episode called Almost Got Him, where it's Poison Ivy, Penguin, Joker, and Killer Croc, and they're all sitting at the table playing cards Two-Face might be there. I haven't watched the episode in a while. And they're all telling their stories about how they almost got Batman. And Killer Croc just goes, I almost got him. And they're like, well, what did you do? And he goes, he came near me and I threw a rock at him. And they're all just like, oh, huh.
Oh, he's
Come
trying.
to find out that it was all a setup by Batman, and Batman was actually dressed as Croc. And then
So he's
all
making
the other
fun of
people,
Killer Croc.
right? And all the
yeah.
other people in the bar are undercover cops, and then they just make a giant like villain bust all at once.
Yeah. So Keaton, I think one thing I'm wondering is, why Killer Croc? Why is he always your go-to? I'm asking the question for all our listeners who aren't here to ask for themselves.
So, when I look at all the different Batman villains, it's so many of them are just scientists that had bad days and it just kind of went south. Or you have his biggest villain, the Joker, and you have the random super order of assassins like the League of Assassins, Ra's al Ghul, and all of them. But Killer Croc is different because he's just a big dude that looks like an alligator. And it's so random to me because you have the Riddler and it's like, oh wow, the Riddler just thought of this brilliant plan. And you have the Penguin and he's just this criminal world, he's just this underboss in the criminal world. Like, all of these characters have these crazy, interesting, deep backstories. And then there's just, oh yeah, and also there's a 9-foot alligator man that lives in the sewer. Like that, like to add on
Yeah.
to things. And so it's the first thing I always think about whenever I think about Gotham City and how weird and crazy it is, because all the other villains almost feel realistic, right? Like Two-Face has like is it still called multiple personality disorder, or
So dissociative identity disorder.
apologies. Okay, Two-Face, like that's something that's real. And like villains like the Riddler, I mean, in the new Batman movie, we saw him. He was almost like the Zodiac killer, very similar, right? With the codes and everything like that. And it's like, man, how are we gonna figure this guy out, right? So a lot of Batman's villains are somewhat in the realm of realism. Killer Croc is 9 feet tall, and it went from basically having really horrible eczema to being green with yellow eyes, scales, and living in the sewers of Gotham. It's so exaggerated, and I kind of love it. And I also, and this is a little bit strange, in most continuities, Waylon Jones is a black man. And so that also, we have Lucius on the side of good, but there's not a lot of Batman villains that are black, right? There's not a lot of supervillains that you really see that are black.
It's not the most diverse set
Right.
of characters in general. I'll give them that.
Like you have Black Manta, who's
Yeah.
like the arch nemesis of Aquaman. He's really awesome. And then Waylon is the only other one besides when I think the DC's animated universe made Lex Luthor into a black man.
Oh,
And he was, yeah,
you're
he was
right.
pretty.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
and it sounds like they're finally making Billy D. Williams into Two-Face, I think, in the comics, right?
Yeah, Batman. Yeah,
And I'm so mad that wasn't that didn't happen in the films.
The continue, right? Oh man, he would have been great. Except in my mind, he would have just been Lando Calrissian as a Batman villain.
Is that so wrong?
For all you listeners out there, this is not a Star Wars podcast.
Maybe someday it will turn into one.
It's not a Star Wars podcast.
No. I'm more of a Trekkie myself.
Maybe someday. It's not a Star Trek podcast.
So
putting my foot down.
So, okay. Waylon Jones, like, you're right. He's very much like an extreme. He goes out of the realistic. And I guess the Penguin kind of veers in that direction. But it's like, okay, some people kind of look like birds. And well, it's true. Some people look like birds. You get what I'm saying.
Well, and Penguin, and we'll get the Croc. We will get there. But Penguin, and I remember animated series Penguin is actually really obsessed with birds. Like it's
Yeah.
weird. It's weird. He's like, oh, he gets pigeons to attack Batman. It's so random. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a criminal mastermind, but also like I am actually an ornithologist that is with an obsession, and it's like,
Exactly.
oh,
And
okay.
yet, that's still more in the realm of reality than Killer Croc. Yeah. And I think one of the things that is so interesting about him is, yeah, he is so outside the realm of norm. What were his options? What were the options for this guy who he has more and more and more of this like essentially like monstrous or reptilian look to him that is very intimidating. And so, okay, well, where is anyone going to accept me? Okay, let me go to the circus where the people who really don't fit in at all, that's where they all go. And here I am now fighting alligators and like you were saying in the beginning, so what comes to mind when you say Killer Croc?
Yeah.
And that's just one of the really interesting things about him, where what came first? What came first? Being a villain or being seen as a villain?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because he never liked the name Killer Croc.
Ah.
Yeah, he never really liked the name Killer Croc. So one of his aliases is actually King Croc,
Hmm.
because when he got the name Killer Croc, he hated it, and then everyone kept calling him that, and he was like, "Well, you know what? I'll be your Killer Croc until I take over and become King Croc."
Mm.
Like he always hated the name, but he hated it so much that it got to the point where he's like, "You know what?
I'm gonna own it and take
I'm gonna
control of
own
it.
it and I'm gonna relish in it." But what's so unfortunate and bad about that is he could have been better. It didn't have to be that way, but from a a very, very young age, he was picked on about this, about how he looked, and his aunt even called him names. I think in the his one of his origin issues, his aunt called him Lizard Boy and a
Mm.
reptile freak, and it just he eventually kills the aunt.
Oh.
He eventually kills the aunt. This is pre-crisis. So pre-crisis, he kills the aunt, and then he ends up committing several murders, and he faces off against Batman and Jason Todd.
Mm.
And then of course at that time though he just resembled a really big he was a big guy just covered in green scales, but he was basically human. But as time moved on, he kept looking more and
Yeah.
more and more reptilian.
He kept fitting the persona of Killer Croc more and more and more and more until
Yeah,
sometimes he literally has a tail, or like people experiment on him to make him even more reptilian.
yeah, and in some universes he is a cannibal, right? He
Mm.
actually does eat people. I mean, in I think it's the in Post Crisis, the Face to Face storyline, they show him and he had been like eating a killer whale. He had been eating an orca, and so it's all these crazy things.
Where did he find? Was he at a zoo? Where did he find an orca?
I'm not sure. That's a
Sorry,
that's a
my
that's a no.
brain got stuck on that.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question, but it's yeah, it's if I we can take a look at it sometime. It's called Face to Face. It's like
Hmm.
I can't remember. It's like between 6 and 10 issues,
Yeah.
but it's in the Detective Comics line.
Okay. So
Yeah,
now here's the thing: bullying does not equal later becoming a bully.
right.
However, there are these unfortunate things that can happen where, yeah, a person's self-esteem and their confidence and how they learn to be able to stand up for themselves can be drastically impacted by these things, where a person may have very, very low self-esteem, or they might act and react and actually you become the very thing you hated. And you can have every reaction in between those as well. hopefully by now the pattern is pretty clear that not everyone's going to have the same response to any of the situations that happen for these people. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of things stacked against him. And I mean, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy here. So within psychology, there's actually a few different angles you can look at. There are different types of psychology that study things from different angles. But one of the things that we tend to see is that when we believe something is true, when we believe something is true, we can actually inadvertently make it more likely to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I'm walking down the hallway and you're walking by and you don't say hi to me. If I assume you don't say hi to me because you don't like me and you're a jerk, and then I get mad at you and I snap at you the next time, you're much more likely to not like me and start becoming a jerk to me. Versus you walk by, maybe you were a jerk, maybe you didn't see me, maybe something just happened and your mind is somewhere else. And so what I perceive to be true about why you did what you did, it affects how I treat you. And in return, that has a ripple effect of how you then, the next time, how you act toward me. So there's this kind of cascading snowball effect that can happen sometimes with these self-fulfilling prophecies of if I'm just really convinced someone is a certain way or this is how things are, I'll start acting like that's true. And then before I know it, it's actually true.
So this is something that I suffer from quite a bit. That snowball effect. I think it's called catastrophic thinking. Like if I text someone and they don't text me back in 5 minutes, maybe they're mad at me. What did I do?
Yep.
What happened the last time we hung out?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna try and think of everything I said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna send them another text message apologizing about this random thing from 3 years ago, right? Like this is something I legitimately struggle with, and it's not one of those things where I'm like, well, if they're mad at me, I'm mad at them too. A lot of times, it's just me blaming myself for something that may or may not have happened.
Yes. So sometimes we perceive things and make assumptions about ourselves. Or we might internalize things and say, oh, something is due to me. So we are the centers of our own universes. Wherever you go, you are the constant, period. Pretty much everything else around you changes. Granted, your cells change and technically, all the blah, 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 blah. You were mentioning biology earlier. Okay, technically you even change. But still, you are the thing that goes along with you throughout your whole life. And so because of that, we naturally filter everything through ourselves. And we sometimes forget that we aren't the center of everyone else's world. And so sometimes what we'll do is we'll internalize and we'll give ourselves more importance in things. And then other times we might have perceptions about the world around us or the people around us. And I definitely, and you're talking about catastrophic thinking, absolutely. And we can consider the worst case scenarios or assume the worst about things. And the thing with Killer Croc. So with a name like Killer Croc, what are people going to assume? If something bad happens around you, you probably did it on purpose. If it from probably a very early age, like this young kid and who grows into an adult literally has things about him that look like a reptile. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it seems as though he fell into that persona. Like you said, he said, okay, if I'm going to be Croc, I'm going for King.
Yeah.
And so how much does the perceptions of how he appears on the outside, who knows how much that influenced how others and even himself perceived him, what he was capable of, the reasons behind what he did, and essentially turned him into the villain. Who knows?
Yeah. and it's interesting because this is still, like I said, he's always been treated as a joke character. I think his first appearance was like 1983. I think it was 1983
Mm.
was his first appearance. And so from 1983 all the way up until before the New 52, he was just seen as this insane and hulking, terrifying character, but was still kind of a joke character. Like, oh, it's Killer Croc. Like, so ridiculous. And one of the things that sticks out to me about this, Amelia, is Batman is no better. Every
Mm.
time Batman encounters Killer Croc, he refers to him as an animal. He refers to him as a monster. He never he even like sometimes he's like he's not a man. It's easy to defeat Croc because all you got to do is look at him like the animal he is and not a human.
I
And
mean, wow.
yeah, even Batman does that. And so I'm like, wow, this guy has he does not have a chance. He doesn't have a chance. And I mean, even when you watch Batman the animated series, they treat him like that. In the Arkham video games, they treat him like that. As a matter of fact, in the Arkham games, the first time you encounter Killer Croc is in the sewer underneath Arkham Asylum. So Arkham, he's not even in a regular cell. They just throw him in the sewer and lock the door.
So there is such a thing as trying to make the environment as healing as it can be for someone.
Hmm.
Is this that Killer Croc or Waylon Jones, shall we say, Waylon Jones really there are these differences for him that for him his healing environment is the sewer? Or is it that he has been beat down to the point where potentially everyone, down to even himself, sees him as I don't deserve anything more than the sewer?
It's interesting because like I feel like Croc has a little bit of a different origin in every single timeline or storyline, because going back to the Arkhamverse, most of it's the same. Abusive aunt, he killed the aunt and left, but then in the Arkhamverse he meets a blind girl who wasn't afraid of him because she could not see him. She he
Mm.
and so she's the one who was in the traveling carnival or circus, and he hangs out with them, and so he was actually happy, and he started wrestling with alligators
Yeah.
and fighting with the reptiles. And so just for a little while he was happy,
Mm-hmm.
and then it got worse because what ended up happening is the crowd started becoming hostile and being mean to the performers. He caught people picking at the little girl that he had befriended, and then the people that he caught and he turned them into the police, and then they
Huh.
got out and blew up their carnival. Like they detonated
Oh.
a bomb, and of course, Crop was thrown into the water and he was fine, but everyone else wasn't.
Oh man.
And so the blind girl died, and most of his friends died, and that was his origin story in the Arkham universe. And so at that point, he was homeless, became a mob enforcer because of his size, and then he started working for Black Mask, and that was his full story. But then he gets caught and thrown in Arkham Asylum, and they feed him raw meat, and he has a shock collar around his neck, and they put him in the sewer. Now, one thing that is interesting, so I don't know if y'all can tell, I'm obsessed with the Batman Arkham games. They're so well written and they do such a great job with the backstory. So, one of the things about the Arkhamverse that's really cool to me is by the time they throw him in Arkham and they have him in the sewer, like you said, it could just be where he's comfortable. But at this point, the psychologist is trying to talk to him and cure him. And of course, she's talking to him and actually getting a little bit of response out of him. But the
Mm.
security guard that brings him in
Mm.
is constantly provoking him. You're a monster. You're an animal. Sit down. Like, just talking to him like an animal. This security guard was a guy by the name of Aaron Cash. You heard me mention him before in I think the Welcome
I
to
think it was
Arkham.
our very first episode you
Yeah,
mentioned the handless
yeah,
guard. Yeah.
yeah. And he had two hands before he
Yeah. Well,
antagonized
and so
Croc.
okay. So here's the thing. And okay, what can be really tricky is that different people have different jobs. And so there are actually times that, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, I'm only speaking from one side of this, but there are actually a number of instances where it makes complete sense and it's only natural for a mental health provider and a security or law enforcer to come into conflict in terms of what they're trying to provide in a scenario
Hmm.
because of what they're meant to provide and how those things differ. They overlap in some ways and they're different in some ways. And on the one hand, okay, so um, the security guard, for example, is going to be a lot more cautious and aware and hopefully adapt the environment to make sure that there's safety. And we need these kinds of things. At the same time, there's definitely this antagonistic piece that you're talking about where this is also someone not trained to actually, or if this person was trained, they didn't take it in whatsoever,
Yes.
to help with bringing out the best in someone and actually reducing the potential for an issue by how we treat people. And so, how do we kind of balance security with humanizing? And was very, very dehumanizing to Waylon Jones, treating him like Killer Croc. And so this is one of the issues that comes up time and time again because a lot of times, especially in the United States, we give people ownership over themselves. You choose your actions, you take responsibility for yourself. There's a very independent thing. And yet there can be a lot of pressure from the outside. And it's very difficult to say be a pacifist and find a peaceful way to open up, be vulnerable, and heal, move forward when someone's hurling insults at you like that. And essentially the self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's not to say that Waylon Jones is not responsible for his actions of biting off the hand.
Hmm.
At the same time, he's not the only factor at play when it comes to Killer Croc being maintained as his persona.
It's unfortunate, and I think finally, they realized that DC realized how unfortunate it was
Mm,
because they gave him some redemption. They gave him some redemption. They gave him a little bit of a comeback story. So, like I said, he was just the Killer Croc, Animal Croc, no substance to his character really from when he was introduced all the way until before the New 52. Now, when the New 52 introduced him, it was interesting because the first time you see him isn't as Killer Croc. The first time that you see Waylon is in Red Hood and the Outlaws. It's like one of the first issues of Red Hood and the Outlaws. And so Red Hood and the Outlaws, a little bit of backstory. Jason Todd comes back as Red Hood. He survives and he becomes a different vigilante of his own. And then he forms a group called the Outlaws consisting of Starfire and Roy Harper. Roy Harper was Green Arrow's sidekick that ended up leaving and becoming he was very addicted to drugs, and it was just a very sad story. So he
yeah.
was very addicted to drugs and alcohol. Well, the first time you hear about Waylon in the New 52 is Roy Harper is in a bar with Jason, and he's only drinking water, and he like thinks back, and out of all people, Waylon was Roy's sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Now, how awesome is that?
Right,
And that's
right.
the thing. So, yeah, people who have struggled, like Roy, can sometimes see beyond the exterior. They understand things a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
That's I love that. I love that it's showing this other side to Waylon and just yeah, giving an opportunity for another direction. And I
Yeah.
got to say, so obviously if there are people who are 9 foot tall, sharp teeth, scaly green, they're very, very few and far between. Like very, very few and far between, right? I don't know if there's some
Right.
sort of condition where that can happen. Maybe there isn't. I'm not aware of it, but it's very, very rare if that's the case.
The condition that he suffers from is a real condition, but
Mm,
it is not nearly as
yeah, yeah. Sounds about right in terms of
yeah,
how accuracy often goes.
right.
But here's the thing. So, okay, there's this exaggeration happening. However, a lot of the things we're talking about, I actually can really relate to experiences that people have described to me. Especially, I mean, you were talking about he's also a black man. So he's this big black guy, and you know what? There are these. I don't know if they did this on purpose and they're more clever than we were giving them credit for or not. But these are very real things that happen in day to day. I can't tell you the number of people I've worked with that are like 6'3" plus big dudes, and
Hmm.
especially if they're a black man, because unfortunately, black men do tend to be perceived in a certain way in our society a lot of times, and so I can't tell you the number of times that a person, especially a man of that size, is very aware that people see them and have treated them as aggressive or violent when that
Right.
was not their intention. Now, am
Right.
I saying that there are no big men over 6'3" that are aggressive? No, I'm not saying that. Obviously,
Right.
but there are also 5 foot women, slim and slender, who are aggressive and violent.
Yeah.
And so the what we see with Waylon, while it's this super extreme, it does really happen. And um, we have people who are often met first with caution, fear, an assumption that there's going to be aggression or things like that, that they're purely pulling out based on just their physical appearance or things that people perceive about them that may or may not be true. And
Right.
I think the stories with Waylon just, I mean, once again in an extreme, but I mean for some people there are some huge repercussions that can happen.
Right. And the one thing I wish that they did, because the New 52 was just basically a huge reset where it changed everyone's backstories and didn't really change the like show what happened. Because so before New 52 we had Cannibal Crazed Croc, right? And then in the New 52 suddenly he's not so bad because basically what ends up happening is from the New 52, which was in 2011, all the way until now, Waylon has kind of become the king of the disenfranchised because
Mm,
he you're in Forever Evil, he's just kind of ruling over Gotham's lower class, and he does still kill because he murders a corrupt SWAT team that of course had killed someone wrongfully, that and they happened to be one of the only people that were nice to Croc, and so
mm-hmm.
he kills that corrupt SWAT team, and then I think he gets angry and he takes over Wayne Tower because of everything going on, and then Bane challenges him, and he doesn't want to do it, so Bane then injects him with venom to
Mm,
kind of make him all crazy and hulking, just so Bane could beat him as like a show of power. But even after that, he does get caught, taken to Arkham, but he befriends someone with diso is let me think. Dissociative identity disorder, right? It's
nice.
not split personality. That's what you told me, right?
Correct. You got it right.
Dissociative. Okay, cool. So he befriends someone with dissociative identity. disorder, and he kind of bonds with her, and so then he escapes, and he kind of walks over her. His character does have depth. Of course, then they redid it again from the New 52, and it went, I think, what was the next one? Rebirth. And in DC Rebirth, Croc is in the Suicide Squad.
Mm.
And even then, like he he actually he actually becomes pretty interesting in DC Rebirth, because like he fights Zod at one point. The Suicide Squad ends up in the Phantom Zone, and he kind of has a relationship with Enchantress June Moon, and so he is a little bit more interesting. And so even after the Suicide Squad, he pops up in Harley Quinn series, and he's still kind of the king of the disenfranchised, because he goes and tries to take over Coney Island, because that's where everyone laughed at him when he was a kid. They made him more interesting.
And it sounds like just having him keep coming around to the hurts that have happened to him. And granted, he's a killer.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not dance around the issue. And if you only see someone as a killer, then a number of people are going to say, okay, well, then I'm going to be the king of the killers.
Right. And it's unfortunate, because in another world, things could have been so different. Like, I think about Croc, 9 feet tall, green and scaly, superhuman strength. He's incredibly strong, incredibly fast in the water, a remarkable swimmer. He would have made a great X-Man.
I was thinking he's like Superman mixed with Aquaman.
Right. He would have, if he had been in Marvel Universe, he would have been perfect.
Yeah.
In the X-Men, but that did not happen.
He would have ended up with Magneto. So I mean,
yeah,
probably not a hero still.
Yeah.
But
now, okay, so I'm glad you brought up hero, because in another universe, in Batman Earth 1, Croc's story is much different. Now, it's much different, but it's still quite tragic, because he still had the tragic beginning, because he was born with the bad skin disease, and caused him to look reptilian. But because of his genetic deformity, his mom sold him to Halley's Circus. And when she sold him to the circus, the owner of the circus made him file his teeth down and referred to him as the Reptile Boy. And so that was his origin story there, and he escapes. He basically runs away from the circus, but everybody in the city, of course, was afraid of him, and so he started living in the sewers. And, of course, people still from time to time would hear of the alligator man in the sewers, and so the media started calling him Killer Croc. And the first time Batman encounters him is because Batman just happens to encounter him in the sewers, and they fight each other. But finally Batman just lets him know, listen, I'm not here to fight you, I'm looking for the Riddler. And Waylon actually ends up helping Batman, and Batman even at one point tries to help him get a cure for his skin disease, and Waylon declines.
So instead of treating Waylon purely as a creature, he stopped and he spoke to him person to person.
Yeah, and
Waylon actually helped.
Yes, and he has so much more depth, because Batman was looking for the Riddler. Waylon had seen the Riddler at some point, but just kind of didn't care, because he's like, the only thing I care about is the sewers. But then he later on, he sees the Riddler detonate a bomb on a train, and he feels extremely guilty about it, and so he helps Batman defeat the Riddler. And then, oh gosh, it gets better. This is by far my favorite Croc stories. Batman Earth 1 Volume 2. If you want to read it, it's Batman Earth 1 Volume 2. After he helps Batman defeat the Riddler, Batman lets Waylon stay at Wayne Manor.
Whoa.
Yeah, Batman lets Waylon stay at Wayne Manor, and Waylon shows Batman an abandoned subway station that Batman makes into his Batcave.
What?
Yeah,
Oh, what could have
yeah,
been?
right, right. Isn't that such a good story though?
Yes. And
That's
this,
such a
this,
yeah.
okay. And I think this is a great way to bookend. Be careful of the assumptions that we make because we will just, I mean, oh man, just the sad tale of Waylon Jones, and what could have been. And like you said, it's not that it's not that without the self-fulfilling prophecy, I mean, he wasn't even able to fully escape from the self-fulfilling prophecy. Killer Croc was still something there, but for someone to put that aside, not just take him at his name and his appearance and just kind of some of that initial stuff and just talking to him person to person. Wow, that's
I
cool.
know. Yeah, yeah. Like it's by far, and honestly, that story made me really love Croc a lot. And it was one thing I definitely wanted to when we were talking about doing this issue. So whenever we decide on a subject, I always go through and I try and do a bunch of research as far as stuff that I've read, or I'll read something maybe that I think would be useful that I haven't read. But I specifically remembered that one because it is such a different take on Waylon that
Yeah.
we had never seen before. And it's by far my favorite because he looks like a monster, but he is far from it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how the world is. You're not the picture on the canvas, you're the story behind it.
Mhm. But it's hard sometimes. It's hard to fight what's on the canvas.
Yeah, especially when all you do is get referred to as a monster and the world's afraid of you and the world is mean to you. It's just your people can I do feel like people can become a product of their environment.
Yeah. Now, I mean, once again, it's not that simple.
Right,
You can put two people in the exact same tough situation and they'll come out differently.
right.
There's genetics to these things in there that there are things that we'll probably never fully understand. But absolutely, our environment can be very strong and we can become the product of some of those things. Does it mean we're not responsible for our actions? No, of course not. We're still the ones actively making choices. And the rest of us are also responsible for our actions. And I think sometimes because it happens indirectly, these assumptions that kind of we're reacting to the canvas in front of us rather than what's going on beneath the surface. We don't always realize how we're impacting each other.
So one question, because I know we're gonna move towards the
Mm,
mindful nerd moment soon, but one question I was gonna ask is if someone is in a situation and all they're being called is something that they don't want to be, what are the steps to overcoming that?
ooh,
How,
yeah,
like
that's a great
I guess
question.
I guess from your standpoint, because of
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like being a clinical psychologist, you run into people all the time that have had to deal with bullying.
Yep.
As far as someone being bullied goes, because gosh, I know I got bullied as a child. I know a lot of my students, as a being a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, I know a lot of my students have dealt with bullying. What do you think is the best way to deal with bullying? Because unfortunately, it doesn't seem like, you know, running and telling a teacher never helped me when
Mm,
I was being bullied. And it was never, and even becoming, when it became physical, that also did not
yeah.
help. It didn't help because there's always gonna be, it's almost like sometimes it would feel helpless because you feel like it's always something, right?
Mm,
And so I was gonna ask how
yeah.
How do you approach that?
So I think finding support where you can is important, even if it's not someone who's directly able to change something. So first and foremost, like finding support where you can, even if it's finding their support online if you don't have someone immediately available to you. But I want to, just in terms of what a person themselves might be able to do, I think there are two pieces. One is how can we try and find ways to create change where we have control, which isn't always very much control. So part of things I'm thinking of is finding ways to find your voice in ways that are as safe as possible. Making sure, unfortunately, part of that sometimes is how do I take a stand in a way where I have an escape route? How do I make sure that hopefully if something does happen, there's a way for there to be record of this so that I have what I need? Keeping in mind, what are ways to just make sure that I am able to stay safe as best I can, be around safe people, try and just minimize those potential places where it's going to be easier for someone to bully. And that's not to say that it's the job of the person being bullied to take care of these things. The hope is that there is a teacher or a parent or someone who can help maneuver through that. And then sometimes there are ways to take a stand when it's safe to do so. Saying what is and is not okay, leaving situations when it's not acceptable. It's hard sometimes, but sometimes we do have a choice to be around someone more or less, and it might hurt to not be around someone because, say, we care about them, but trying to minimize those interactions where we can. But I think one of the potentially more important things, because unfortunately without a specific scenario, it's sometimes hard to give those specifics of what we can control. But I think, I don't know if I would say perhaps it's more important, but you were alluding to the fact that we can lose hope. There's always something, I think is what you said. And especially when these things get really bad, and especially if it's happening for someone when they're young, when you have less power and control to exit a situation on your own. It can be very hard to keep in mind that life, one of the only constants is change. Does it mean that every other situation is going to be an easy road? No, not necessarily. However, everything changes, and trying to remember the assumptions. We have assumptions about things, and you were talking about catastrophizing. And so when we're in a tough spot, it can get overwhelming, and it can feel like it can seem as though there's absolutely no escape. It's always going to be this way. I'm never going to be able to leave this. And life changes. Eventually, the scenario can change or will change. You leave, the other person leaves, something else changes. So let's take someone in school. You end up in different classrooms from each other the next year. These things change and ebb and move. You were talking about being bullied a lot before. My hope is you're not being bullied a lot now.
Right.
And I think that is what I think hit home with the most, is the fact that not everyone is a bully. It can feel like everyone's a bully at times. And for Killer Croc, I think this is a great example that unfortunately for some people, they're misunderstood by many. And even Killer Croc, even in the hardest storylines, there's the therapist reaching out. Or there's Batman saying, hey, hold on, actually, I wasn't here to fight you.
Yeah.
There's the little blind girl. There's the circus. There's even for these characters that really, really struggle, it tend to be these moments where you can see not everyone is against them. And so, really trying to focus in on those things and grow those opportunities where you can, because they're just so important when, unfortunately, there's a bully or, just it seems like the world's against you.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. That's really good.
So, for the mindful nerd moment, actually, I think this fits really well with what you were asking about. So, what I wanted to do for Killer Croc is kind of let's envision that we're Waylon Jones, and we might not like what we see in the mirror, and we Waylon Jones in a lot of these storylines probably underneath, if you dig deep, probably doesn't have the best probably doesn't have the best self-esteem, probably doesn't have a lot of self-worth in a lot of ways, probably sees himself in a negative light because of the ways he's been treated, and because of how he looks on the outside and how it just differs from kind of the norm. So I wanted to do a self-compassion break. This is a fairly quick one. I was going to say quick and easy. I wouldn't say it's easy. So it's hard to give ourselves compassion at times, and especially if we haven't been given compassion much by other people. But once again, what you were talking about, let's say that it feels like it seems like there's always something else coming up down the road. It's that much more important to try and find the compassion within ourselves that we can connect with. So, what I'd like for us to do is just take a moment to just envision that you're Waylon Jones. Maybe imagine that you're looking into a mirror. Just kind of take in yourself and what you look like. We're not trying to change it. We're not trying to focus in on any specific part, but just kind of noticing what you look like. And just like we've been practicing in other mindful nerd moments, not trying to label anything as I like this, I don't like this. Just noticing yourself. And in that, I'd like you to say silently to yourself, in a moment of just allowing for Waylon's discomfort, the discomfort that he likely feels in taking himself in, and saying, this is a moment of suffering. This hurts. And then saying to yourself, suffering is a part of life. I'm not alone. We all struggle in our lives. And even though we're all different, other people feel this way. And now I'd like for you to put your hands over your heart and feel the warmth of your hands and the gentle touch of your hands on your chest. Just notice what that feels like, that weight on your chest and the warmth that it brings. And say to yourself, may I be kind to myself. And ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? And if you know what that is, go ahead and give that to yourself. It might be things such as, may I give myself the compassion that I need? May I learn to accept myself as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be strong? May I be patient? And so with that, you can lower your hands and we'll say thank you to Waylon for giving us this time in our Mindful Nerd moment, and we'll come back together. So what do you think?
I really like that one. I really like that one. Like, because I feel like a lot of them Most of the mindful nerve moments are all about taking a moment and just like catching your breath and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
helping yourself calm down. But this focusing on self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
I, I think it's very very important because when it's not just what's around you that's bothering you, and it's actually something inside of you that you see in the mirror that's
Yep.
bothering you, that can be so much tougher because
Mm-hmm.
it's not something you can escape from. You can't
Right.
you can't leave that situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. The question you asked about bullying is a very hard one. But essentially, trying to find safety where you can and deal with the external thing around you. And bullying, unfortunately, almost always hits on something internally. And like you said, what's internal to us, you can't just walk away from. And I'm saying just walk away as if it's always easy to get away, but you know what I'm saying. Wherever, like I was saying earlier, wherever you go, there you are. And so trying to make sure that all these other things don't take away from our ability to have compassion and esteem within ourselves.
And yeah, and honestly, I think that if there's one thing that I have learned researching Waylon Jones is that you can be more than what the world says you are.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown. You can find me at Crafting the Mind on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
And I'm comic enthusiast and nerd aficionado Keaton Hopkins. You can find me and my friends' movie reviews and reaction videos at teamjvs.com or on YouTube at teamjvs.
For more information on this and other topics, check out our website at bat-therapy.com. To keep current on episodes and other updates, subscribe to our Bat Therapy YouTube channel or follow us on social media. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.